Hey, how you doing? Let's do it to it and go on through it. Alright, let's get this board editor up and rolling. Okay, we gotta clear the board. One second. Sorry, I get a drink. Alright. Okay, we're in the compensation comp section. Remember that from last night? We are doing compensation. So if you want to see what we were studying, you need to go to Chess Cruncher TV and on YouTube, and you can go to the prior day and see the games that we used on for. It's called Chapter 8 Comp for compensation. Let's see here. Oh boy. Let's get the kings on the board. Let's do the queens and then the two knights. Yes. Oops, wrong spot. Let's see, we got one bishop. Perfect. And then it's white to move, so we don't have to worry about castles. Let's just make sure we have the pieces in the right formation, and then we will proceed into our lesson. Alright, perfect. Everything looks Operation Go so far. So good. So let's put in the players' names. Okay, got Ann on. That's all I need for that. Then I'll do the other player. Yep. Oops, I think I need to bring this in closer. Is that too close? Yeah. Beautiful. Okay, nice. So white, perfect. We'll enlarge this screen. Oops, come on. There we go. And then we'll read a little now. Viswanathan has analyzed his late opening position 3 years before when preparing for a world championship match. But he hadn't gotten a chance to use his analysis until this game because no one had played black's last move before, bishop to e6, against him. He finally got his chance to play. What move would you say in this game for white? If you can find this, you are on the level of Viswanathan for analytical thinking and compensation, of course. So this is based on compensation, which means it could potentially be a piece sacrifice, which allows your position to get better through compensation. It could be a pawn sacrifice, queen sack, bishop sack, maybe rook giving up its life for the position. So with all that information, stop right now if you want to go over it for yourself, if you're watching this recording on a recording, and then see if you can solve what Viswanathan did. Okay, if you want to continue onward, you just let it continue to play, and we will we will do the move that Viswanathan played, which was, this is all in his preparation too. So knight to d4 was what he's been playing since a lot of he analyzed this, never really got to play it till his opponent Wang, W-A-N-G, played bishop to e6 on his last move for black. What he remembered from the 2008 analysis was that after e takes d, c takes d, white will have two strong pawns for the knight, and the pawns will severely restrict black's pieces. Offside, the knight offside on a5, and that's more than enough compensation. He concluded this. He got two pawns for the piece, and his pawns are just so massively strong that if a knight ever tried to retreat back, that would be a mistake at that point, because you could actually at that point play bishop takes, maybe even queen a4. If knight here, queen a4. So if knight goes here, queen a4 might be an idea. Queen a4. So that's always potential play. Okay, his evaluation turned out to be exactly right when then play came bishop c this here, which is really an interesting continuation. I really am not sure truly why Vishy didn't play that move. Maybe it has to do with queen a, but I don't think so. Maybe Vishy could have played. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it wasn't that move. Maybe if this here, it's bishop d. That's the idea. I'm thinking that that's the main idea, and the idea of the thrust with d5 would just be way too much. And of course, if they try knight d3, you have d5, and then if the bishop retreats back, now you have this fork on d6. So the knight can't retreat back there. The knight would have to retreat here, and then I think the same result happens here. And the queen is surprisingly trapped. There really is no spot for the queen to go to. Yeah, so that I think that's why he didn't move there, because this actually loses a queen on the spot here. So maybe queen to d, but then you lose a piece with d5, and if the knight retreats out, you take. Queen takes, and now Vishy's the one, I think, a pawn up if I'm not mistaken here. Yeah, so that's kind of why the knight played there, was to avoid that type of an exchange. And let's see if he played queen. Oh, he played queen c3. Interesting. So he played more tactile. I think I'm not sure why he didn't play queen d2. Maybe it's because of rook. I think if queen d2 here, rook a would cause some headaches because of the queen being on this open file. We would want to play that, but we couldn't play it because bishop takes. Well, maybe we could. It's kind of all in the style of the player. This is more kind of a positional restricting idea. Oh, I see why it doesn't work. Silly me. I see why it doesn't work. Let's go back here. It doesn't work not for that reason. It doesn't work for this reason here. The knight would hit the rook and the queen at the same time, and that's the problem. So that's why Vishy played c6, c3. That's the reason. So this would actually be a mistake here. So you'd have to be really careful. So c3, queen c3, knight to a7, and this is, they're trying to get the knight involved here. Rook f d1, and the idea is to get this pawn pushed. And more reinforcements. Rook a d8. They're trying to stop. Anon wants to get his pass pawn in the center rolling, but he's going to have to bring more reinforcements. This is an interesting positional move because he realizes that he's not going to be able to really get the pawn pushed yet, and his pawn is protected enough with the queen and rook. And I believe his next idea is potentially bishop g3, and then after the queen goes back to c8, because I think that's really the only move that black has that potentially. Oh, then the knight actually hangs at that point. Interesting. That's an interesting continuation. Really interesting. So probably at this point, the knight's gonna have to go from a5 to c6 at that point. Knight a c6. Let's see if he did that. Wow, a6. I think, oh, I see why that attacks the bishop. Okay, really interesting. And this is the interesting idea here. If you were considering, see, this attacks the queen. This is the move that was played by Vichy. If you were considering queen a4, there's only one sitch with that. You have b5, and you can't do in passing because your queen would be hanging at that point. So you'd have to actually retreat your bishop back. And then this actually gives a knight a really nice outpost at this point. So even if you played here, then the queen doesn't really have to worry about it. You can actually play there if they wanted to. Maybe, no, I don't think you'd want to play queen d7. I think queen b7 would probably be enough compensation. So that's why the bishop's probably going to have to, if I was Vichy, I'd probably retreat my bishop back to e2 here, and then that still keeps the threat in play. So queen goes to c8, still keeping. See, the idea is even if bishop e2, you have pawn b5, and you can't play in passing again because of the queen's hanging. So bishop f1. This is full retreat, and this safeties the king. So if there's ever any back rank problems, this bishop will stop any checks that would be discoveries or anything. So it's not a bad move. It's a really interesting move. White hadn't calculated this far previously and didn't know, for example, how AC8 would have actually been affected. So back here, I'm thinking, let's see, oh, right here. After this, here, here. His opponent played b6, but potentially knight ac6 is an interesting idea. And if you were thinking about that idea, then queen d6 would come with a really good attack, because now this rook is blunted from the protection of d4, and the idea is pawn to d5, and after bishop takes, pawn takes, knight takes, he actually could probably go for a pretty tremendous attack. So that's kind of why b6 was played, is they didn't really want to allow that type of counterplay from white. So, and then at this point, rook a b1, this goes after the pawn. So I'm wondering if potentially, well, I see why he had to do that. He couldn't play pawn to b5 because then the knight would hang. This is an interesting position here. This move actually gets me exclaimed. This takes advantage of a piece that this pawn's overloaded. It can't protect the knight and deal with c5. The pawn on b6 is overloaded. Knight b3 was actually played here. This is a forced continuation. So I'm thinking that, and Vishy can't actually play takes because of the rook. So maybe Vishy could play rook takes b3 here. And then if bishop takes b3, queen takes b3, would he have a compensation? I think pawn takes would be played at that point. So I'm not sure if rook takes b3. Maybe it is good. Let's see if he plays it. He does play it. So we're thinking correctly there. Bishop takes, and then queen takes, b takes c. So we actually calculated properly. At this point, I want you to stop if you're watching this on recording, and if you would like to try to find the move that Vishy played, and you probably already see it, so you can also continue to watch with us starting right now. Okay, where the move is d5 exclam. It's kind of like a back-to-back piece sacrifice. It's an exchange sac. And the bishop and pawn leads to an easy win in view of queen. A white's queen would be able to go to queen to b6, followed by queen takes a6, and then the theory of two weaknesses come into play. Or potentially, maybe even after that, there's potentially bishop d6, so queen b6, there's bishop d6, there's bishop takes a6, there's a whole bunch of threats. And Alexander Alekhine underlined his ability to conclude it must be sound when he explained why he gave up the exchange in the endgame at one of the positions of Nottingham. I think we actually went over this game. I think back a little further. Let me make sure. I think this was a prior game that we went over in a prior chapter. Nottingham, 1936. One of the combinations that an experienced player does not need to calculate the finish. He knows that under given circumstances, the king side pawns must become overwhelming. Alekhine wrote, of course, many players are surprised if this actually happens. They want to calculate further. How much further is it necessary if your compensational sacrifice is good, and you know it is? Don't waste basically time calculating, because you're going to need that time, my Chess Cruncher team, in later more critical situations. But you're thinking, wait a second, I'm just going to sacrifice a rook for maybe a bishop and a pawn, but I'm not going to get two pawns for that. and you're saying that it's not a that's not a critical position. I understand what you're saying, that it is a critical position, but if you know it's a good move, it doesn't hurt your position, you get a better position, go with it and see what happens. Remember, chess is all about fun and improving. The only way you can get better is by learning, of course, with our team. And if you like what you see, always you're more than welcome to click follow on Twitch, or you can also do it on elitechess.org if you wanted to. And we just go over these and learn and improve. And why not actually learn at your own home, and you don't have to risk basically the one on your opponent's side and zero on yours. But I know with proper understanding, my friends, you will be able to spot these too. Think about it. Yes, they're really great players, like they're grandmasters, but they all started out where we did, at the beginning of understanding compensation. So don't fear, we're going up the ladder as well. Okay. Now that my throat is moist again, let's continue. Okay, we're gonna do another game here. Excuse me. Wow, that was an interesting sneeze there. Huh. Wow. Okay, let's get this position set up. Oh, excuse me. Huh. I'm so sorry I had a hiccup a little there. Let's get a queen, then we'll get started on our lesson. One sec here. Okay. If we can take a look at this, who's more exposed if you think about it? It's actually black, but who potentially can get attacked first depends if white. I'm not sure. It's potentially equal in my opinion. So let's put this in and start up. Let's get the players in their position. Okay. Okay, white to move. Let's do it to it. Okay, 24 minutes. Wow, we're doing really good. We're already into, I think, our second game, if I'm not mistaken. Good. We might even be able to get through 4 tonight. That would be cool. Okay. One of the things you should notice is that the f7 pawn is unprotected by black. That makes it a potential target. So in the Keto principle, you have to always think about what targets are exposed. Like if we could get a knight here, this would be wonderful, because then you would have a fork if you somehow can get a knight there. So and it can be attacked via bishop to this pawn here. It could be attacked via bishop c5 or c4, I mean, which is also a good positional move. White doesn't expect to win the f-pawn, but he expects that if he can get his bishop to d5, he will have established a strong outpost on d5. The third thing a master would notice is the bishop is unprotected on c5 as well, or c4. That would allow knight takes e4. Then queen takes queen takes c4, as well as a discovery attack on the queen. So, such as knight takes b3 check. Oops, sorry, I forgot to put some moves in. That's my bad here. I was reading along and forgot to put some moves in. Okay. Nevertheless, white plays bishop c5 or c4, then knight takes e4, and then bishop d5 exclam at this point. He might have stopped here and concluded he would have good compensation in view of his control over d5. And the weakness of black's king position after the trade of bishops. But white, perhaps the best calculator of his was actually the best calculator of his generation. Looked further and saw that knight to c5 would not prevent. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Knight takes g. This is actually the move. Knight c5 would not. Let me see, where are we at? Would not provide black with adequate king protection because of knight to e4. And this would be an exclam continuation, because you're stripping the king of their defenders. All of his soldiers are being pulled away on missions that aren't important. This move makes no threats, but it's just a good plus move. Like king b1, rook d2, and then rook hd1 would also be maybe coming as well. White would likely look even further and would have seen that after rook takes or knight takes g, queen takes would also have some good compensation, which is what was played here. He will have good compensation as well once he gets his king rook into play. The position went like what we were talking about. This here, queen takes, king b8 for to get off of this file, because it'd be horrible if somehow white could pin the queen to the king That would be game, set, and match at that point. Rook H, E1. Rook C8. Trying to actually threaten mate. Queen G2. This is also now white's threatening to play bishop takes b7, queen takes b7, queen takes b7, king takes b7, and then knight to a4 or a5 check, and then knight into c4, which with good compensation for the knight potentially. I'm not sure though. I don't like it. It still is good though. See if the bishop took, the rook would have to take, because if the queen took, then that would be a complete blunder. The queen would mate on c2. You wouldn't want that to happen. If he had seen this far, white couldn't be sure how his sacrifice would turn out. All he would know is that he has good pressure, and what compensation, and that's what compensates for one pawn. After often amounts to, so basically pressure against the king, and not the king being safe anymore, is compensation for one pawn. The pressure and the fear of black's position collapsing is enough compensation for basically the pawn being down from white. It's not ensured. It is not an assured of an advantage. It is merely an indication of promising prospects. The pressure we just talked about. The indication turns out to be accurate. After a few moves, like bishop takes, rook takes is forced, queen b6, correct, and then rook to e4. This is an interesting continuation for sure. I'm not really sure why he moved his queen to b6. This is an exclam move. I really like that. That gets everything into the fray. The queen guards two spots, G2, C2, and G1, where the white queen would like to infiltrate into. This is a really awkward position, to say the least. Black made one mistake, and it was rook to c7 here. This was the mistake. Should have continued probably with just protecting, bringing the rook from h8. This probably might have been a much better idea of rook probably just over here. Just guard the position. What could it hurt, right? And just keep everything solid. Don't let your guard down. But this actually gave up a lot. I know what black's trying to do. Black wants to double up, but it's way too slow. Way too slow. King, okay, queen to g4 here. This is the this was the idea behind rook e4. And then king a7, not a8, a7, king a7 was a forced continuation. Otherwise, they would, of course, you saw that they would lose a queen to a pin. But the pawn gets taken back because and now the queen has to run. So queen to e3 check, king b1, and now if queen e1 check, rook d1 is a playable move. h5 here was actually a bad mistake. You really don't want to allot that type of a problem. Yikes. Queen d1. Now white's actually rerouting, and potentially white can actually play a4 and then potentially a5 and rook b6. That would be a tremendous an advantage for white. Wow. Rook h a c8. So now the queen surprisingly wouldn't be too upset if the rook's traded off. Wouldn't be too bad. It'd kind of be a slight amount of awkwardness, but I still think it'd be okay. And then queen f1 at this point. And it's actually preparing rook there, and then you're threatening mate. The knight actually covers c1, so not a problem. Ooh, queen takes a6 right away. Whoa, that would lead to mate, wouldn't it? So if rook takes here, this would be a double question mark blunder. Queen check is forced, king takes, and then rook a5 would be mate. Wow. That is just plain amazing of a move. That's beautiful thinking. All right. Wow. We're doing really good here. We might even be able to get a fifth game in if we keep up this pace, which would be nice. We're actually entering another section inside of the chapter, compensation, or comp. So, oops, I think I went a little too far on the pawns. Let's make sure we have everything right. Oops, I forgot a knight. That would be helpful. Otherwise, there wouldn't be equal material. Okay. Black to move here. No reason for castling because they're already castled, so that's fine. Okie dokie. perfect. Okay, this is called, the next section is called Pretty Pictures, Muddled Pictures. Muddler pictures. So pretty pictures, comma, muddled or pictures. So this should be interesting. Of course, it's possible that white could calculate bishop to bishop c4. Let's see, bishop c4. Where's c4? c4. As far as rook, that can't be. What am I missing? Bishop c4. Huh. It's saying it's possible for white to calculate on move 1 bishop c4 as far as move 7, which would be on move 7 rook e4 or even further. But as we said earlier, masters distrust a lot of calculation. They know you can't calculate everything, and if you try, the picture gets really muddled basically. The conclusion you draw are more dubious, and the likelihood for error soars dramatically in that position. The learners of chess feel he has to look 6 or 7 moves ahead to justify a sacrifice. The justify a sacrifice is you're actually diluting the position, and potentially you can make a mistake. A revealing look at how a master thinks was given by David Bronstein in his memorial game here. He is actually black, and his opponent Planic is white. Okay. Bronstein took half an hour before choosing queen to h5, which threatens bishop takes h6 or h3. So the continuation by its opponent was g4, bishop takes g4. The spectators concluded that he had invested his time on h5 because he expected g4 and needed to calculate deeply to be sure that his bishop's sacrifice was sound. Wrong. Bronstein revealed that he was really thinking about in the diagram was that what he would do if white replied with knight to h5. So it wasn't this move that he was thinking. He was looking at what would he do if knight h5, which is actually the better move in that position. It's the better of the moves. He evaluated and decided that black has no advantage, and he would have offered a draw if this would have been played. The mighty Bronstein would have offered a draw. The reason why he didn't agonize over the conclusion of this move here with bishop takes h was that he knew that if h took here, that knight would take, and he's got just compensation. It must be good because of a threat of mate on queen to h2 is mate. So his opponent after bishop takes played bishop f4 to cover this mating threat here from black. And so Bronstein just decided to play bishop to d6, which is a really, surprisingly, most of us would retreat, wouldn't we? We would just say, we're up a pawn, that's good, we can win a game, we can win the game, right? Yeah, but the problem is white has more attackers attacking our king, and if we can somehow basically distract this bishop away, even if rook takes, pawn takes, knight takes, we're still threatening. So an idea which they did play it. Bishop takes, rook takes, rook f, e1. The interesting idea is if you were considering this, this actually loses on the spot to knight takes there. There's no way that white can basically give up the queen and then move the rook, and then when that moves back, the king could try to run. But actually you have a check, he moves back, and you could even, if need be, you can come back and then there, rook d2, and it's really interesting position. So his opponent didn't fall for that because they both were strong, really strong players. Bronstein played g6. Wait a second, what am I? See, how did he get g6? I must have missed something. Maybe this is the correct continuation. G takes. But that can't be right. That can't be right. No, there's something amiss. There's something amiss here. Do I not have it set up right? Hold on, let me make sure. Let me just turn the board really fast to make sure I have this set up properly. It looks spot on correct. Let's play it from white's perspective, because maybe I'm missing something from doing it from black's perspective. So let's make sure that we have this all correctly. Okay. Ah. Oh, that's the reason. This right here. I had the wrong positional setup. Yep, this is the problem. Okay, now we can turn the board around. I got the lines confused a little bit. Okay, now we got it. And then this here. Now we're good. Takes, rotakes. Here we go. Rook F. Fe1. Rook to G6. Now we're good. White's defenses are about to fall apart. Knight C3. Queen H2 check. King F1. Knight F6. Bishop E4. Then Queen to H3. Check. King E2. Knight takes. Rook takes. And then Rook to oops, not Rook E8. Rook E6. This allows a master to be confident when he stops calculating. There are several factors, including numbers of positional pluses and threats, that a sacrifice offers, but both basically the master looks a little bit further, but often he likes to look a little further in the position, and then the thing was literally. Let's see what we're doing here. Perfect. Yeah, this was a little longer of a section, so we might yeah, this one would be a little bit tougher of one. Oh, what we'll do is we'll do a little kind of a summary on it. So I think we got through 4, which is actually good. I was only thinking about getting through 3, so we did good here. Let's talk about what we learned from each one. Or did we only get through 3? I think we only got through 3. Let's talk about what we learned here. Okay, from Vishy's game. Well, you know what? Let's do it. Let's do another one. You know what? Let's go for it. Let's do it to it. Let's go for it. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, let's go for it. I'm in the spirit to do it, so you know what? When the Lord tells you to do something, yeah. If it's in His will, then do it. But remember, always make sure if it's the Lord that's telling you to do it too, because you got to be smart about your decisions. Like in chess, you got to be smart about that. And if you know you got compensation, I guess what we're learning from this chapter on compensation is that if you know it's a good move, go with it. Because I think what Andrew Soltis is telling us is that if sometimes you doubt, you might actually make a bad move and not have the right idea for the play at hand. Let's see here. Okay, it's white to study. I mean, it's white to move. Study, that's funny. white's perspective. Let me get a drink and then we'll get started. White is a pawn ahead, but may lose one of his central pawns. He has to play bishop d4, and then g5 and g4 with a pretty tremendous attack for black. Shirov chose rook b4, which is, you may argue about whether this would have been proper to first have played bishop to our queen here. You may have thought queen e2 first, but there's little doubt that white has ample compensation and a much easier position to play after the sacrifice that Shirov did, which was right here. Knight takes, and then a takes b4. What has white gotten for the exchange? Well, for starters, his vulnerable c pawn or c5 pawn is solidly protected, and part of the aggressive phalanx, I think I'm pronouncing that right, that threatens to rip open white's kingside, or black's kingside's protection. In return for the half b file, white has the use of a more vulnerable, valuable a file. And so white threatens to play queen a1, bishop c, and then b5 with a pretty massive attack. This becomes clear after black plays a6, trying to stop b5. White would have a good chance after queen a1, but he wants to get his knight, not the bishop, to d5. So what he plays is or d4, I mean. So knight d4 was played here. Queen could take e5 if need be, but the knight went actually back to b8. You're thinking that this potentially could win material, right? Queen a1 is actually a really strong move here. When the bishop retreats, also a strong move is knight takes e5 for black. This is a stronger continuation, and actually it's not an exclam. But the problem is you have bishop f4, and if it's very powerful, if f6, then the bishop could actually retreat back, and you're now preparing to play that move. Or maybe even better was knight takes e6. So that's why f6 can't be played. So perhaps most important, he realized that if black also played d4 and bishop c6, it eliminates the danger of queen a1, but f4 exclam consolidates white's positional advantage, and Shirov should be in a good position now. All of his weak pawns have gone from being targets to strengths, and now black stops all winning plans. Such white has a queen a1, and perhaps after that rook b1, and then knight takes c6 could be played, and then b4, b4 b5 is also a playable move. That's kind of why one of the Pogar sisters played knight to b6, knight to b8, and then the queen went to a1, bishop c6, f4, consolidating Shirov's weaknesses, g6, and then bishop f2, h g8, trying to basically play g5, pawn takes g5, and maybe pawn takes or rook takes. I'm thinking rook takes g5 would be better to keep the open file against the king. So rook b1, and now the idea of taking and then b5 is coming into play. In fact, this position is so strong after knight to b8 that potentially b5 could have actually been played here by Shirov. And then if a takes b, a takes b, and then takes, bishop takes, knight takes, and queen a5, queen b1, followed by queen b2, and then rook a1. Or if queen takes e5 here, bishop d4, queen g5, and then knight a7 check, and then after the king, queen b1, and basically it's wins. The flip side to liking the look of your side of the board is liking the appearance of damage that a sacrifice inflicts on an opponent's position. That's kind of the what you have to, sometimes have to think about. How much damage does my sacrifice do to help my position? And that's why that move would have been interesting. Okay, now that we did 4, now what we'll do is we'll talk about what we had priorly learned in compensation. We learned that, let me see, where, okay, here. We learned in our first game, let's go back, and then we'll wrap up on this. We learned in our first game that bishop to c4 is really strong, and after knight takes e4, bishop d5 would cramp black's position and cause enough compensation for the pawn. And it actually did. It's kind of one of those things you have to be okay with the compensation here. And then this move here was a really subtle one, rook e1. If you weren't looking and you made a mistake, this actually wins on the spot, queen g4. And so white noticed that they could barricade with their rooks, activate their position to a stronger level through compensation, and they noticed that the black king is more vulnerable than theirs, and so they took advantage of it through compensation of a pawn sacrifice. Okay, the next one that we did, oops, oh, we forgot the Anon game. Anon's compensation d4, he played on he didn't get to play when he faced Magnus Carlsen, in his world championship. Magnus never played bishop to, at this point, bishop e6. So Anna was able to do a position that he over the at-home prep he got to use. Surprisingly, he was able to use that, and he picked up 2 pawns for the piece, strong center, and just so much compensation was put there for his position that it overwhelmed his opponent. So now you get to see how a strong center really makes a difference in a game. Okay, now we're going to look at Bronstein's game as black. Bronstein looked, and he did this for basically a half an hour or so. I think, let me make sure that it was a half an hour. I think it said a half an hour. Let's see, bronze. Yeah, it took half an hour. Just wanted to make sure I had that right. To find this move, they're like, what, were you calculating this move? Bronstein, no. He says, I was calculating h4, and I would have offered a draw at this point because there's no real way for black to get any compensation, and he would have been okay with it. But the g4 move gave enough compensation that allowed a weakness on h2, and he honed in on that weakness, and white had to basically trade down all their good pieces, and in the end Bronstein won. Okay, the last game was a Shirov game, and he played e2. I think, let me make sure that I have the right continuation here. Before we gotta promote this, he played rook b4, and the whole idea about this whole basically exchange sacrifice was to make his pawns stronger. And if you noticed that the position is closed, so the knight actually is a better position in a closed position. That's why Shirov did that, and then he realized that the compensation he got was an open A file, and the compensation that he would get is all of his pawns would start to become stronger. He would use his pawns as a force to be reckoned with, and it actually ended up happening, and he won. And so the idea that we learned from that is that rather than making his Shirov made his position, rather than making it muddled, Shirov made it pretty clear, a pretty clear picture of what he wanted, and made his play really straightforward and simple to do. So I guess what we can take away from compensation is check to make sure the compensation gives you an advantage. And then the next section was pretty positions are muddled positions. And so make sure the sacrifice makes the position, like how you can imagine a green field with the sun, with grass, and beauty. If you imagine like a green field without a sun and all like clouds and all that, that's kind of the muddle that they were talking about, how it looks gray and not pretty. But if you can imagine like a sun, green field, nice little house and all that, that's the pretty picture they're talking about. I know I'm talking about pictures, but in chess you have to visualize your position, and it's vital that we talk about this. It's that you see what you need to do. You have to see it before and then get to that position. So it's almost like you have to start at the end and work backwards. So just keep that in your forefront. And with that, we will say adieu on that. I wanted to thank you for all logging on, being patient with me on that one solution, and sticking with me while I'm talking to you about all the sections, because I know you would probably want to play chess games, but remember, when you start becoming an improver player and you're on your route to mastery, international master Andrew Martin said that you'll switch the amount of time you play to more study, and then you'll see your rating improve. But you know what? When it's all said and done, after compensation and the pretty picture, the choice to receive the Lord Jesus is the best picture. He's who we're all about. And I pray that you receive him as Lord and Savior. And that, you know what? I remember the three choices, remember the three results to two. There's really only two results that you have. You can't put it off. Eventually, we have to decide what we're going to do with the Lord Jesus. You have to either choose him or reject him. I pray that you choose him again. But remember what Bruce Lee said is that you take what you know, so what we just learned here, and apply it. And then what you do is you do something with it. You're willing to do something with it, which is practice over the board. And remember that you're not going to be perfect the first time. So, you know what? That's why Tom Thumb Thumb told Tango to treasure your victories. So when it does work out, treasure those victories. But, I know it hurts to go over the losses, but learn from your losses. And remember, it doesn't define who you are. Remember, treasure your victories, learn from your losses. Remember that mistakes does not define who you are. It's how you handle the mistake that defines you as a chess player in whatever field the Lord Jesus has called you into. And that's what the Team Chess Cruncher motto is all about. We, as a team, hang up our coats, hang up our hats, sit down and study when most won't. Team Chess Cruncher does, and that makes all the difference. And as Leslie So says, serve the Lord Jesus. And as I say, God bless. And I'll see you next time on Chess Cruncher TV. Have a blessed morning, afternoon, and evening. Lord willing, I'll be back on tomorrow. And we'll get to go over some more and have fun doing our studies. And it makes more sense now, doesn't it, team, that when we hear what Colonel Hannibal Smith said, is that even inside of a random position, there's always a plan. Even inside of a kind of awkward position, there's always a plan. It may be a compensation that Shirov did, and it may be a compensation Anon had already preparation for. But in the end, there's always a plan. And when you see it and you get to implement it, you get to say, I love it when a plan comes together. Okay, 2 thumbs up. Hoorah. Be blessed. I will see you tomorrow. And if not, have fun and keep studying. Okay? Be blessed. Bye-bye, team. Hoorah. Go Team Chess Cruncher. Bye-bye.